It had been a long, hard year for everyone on Sodor, and now it was Christmas time. The engines on the Fat Controllers Railway and the Skarloey Railway were busy bustling about with the preparations, from getting Crovan's Gate Station decorated for the annual Christmas party to delivering people and parcels to their destinations before the big day. Of course, they were still very excited because engines love this time of year, and no one was more excited than fearless Freddie. It would be his first Christmas since returning from the works. One day, about a week before Christmas, Freddie was at the wharf collecting decorations. They were being unloaded by Colin the wharf crane. He is much smaller than a dockyard crane like Cranky, but still very efficient, and doesn't complain about heavy loads. What matters to Colin is getting the work done come rain or shine, and without fuss.
"This'll be my first real Christmas in many years,"
Freddie said to Colin.
"In all that time, I think I've forgotten what a true Christmas feels like."
"I wouldn't know either,"
replied Colin sadly.
"I've never experienced the joys of celebrating the festive season like everyone else has. I've only heard stories about it."
Freddie was surprised.
"There's me going on about how I haven't had a proper Christmas for so long,"
he thought to himself as he went back to his work,
"when someone like Colin has never even experienced it."
Freddie was kept busy at the wharf, but he still thought about Colin and what he had said. At last it was time to take his train back to the yard.
"You know,"
Freddie called to his driver as they puffed along the open line,
"we ought to show Colin the joys of celebrating Christmas."
"I'm sure that'd be a gift he'd treasure," the driver replied. "But what about the thin controller? Likely he's already begun making preparations for the traditional party at Crovan's Gate." Freddie sighed knowingly.
"But couldn't we ask him to rearrange it just this once?"
he asked.
"For Colin."
"Better to try than not, old boy," smiled the driver. "'Tis the season after all." Freddie beamed hopefully as they steamed on. When they reached the yards at Crovan's Gate, they saw the thin controller giving the other engines their annual Christmas jobs. Freddie then told him all about Colin and his idea. The thin controller pondered.
"It is most unusual," he said at last. "We always have our party at Crovan's Gate with the Fat Controller's engines. But remembering the spirit of the season, I'm sure we can make an exception and move it to the wharf this year."
Freddie beamed happily.
"But I'll have to conduct a recce first, for safety precautions, before rearranging anything with Topham," the thin controller added firmly.
"I understand, sir,"
replied Freddie.
"Oh, this'll be a Christmas for Colin and I to remember."
Once the checks had been carried out and the approval given, the thin controller quickly made rearrangements. First, he phoned the Fat Controller and told him all about the plan.
"Sounds just like a Christmas surprise we once gave Mrs. Kindly,"
grinned the Fat Controller, remembering.
"I heartily approve."
The engines went about their annual Christmas jobs too. Mighty Mac were chosen to collect the Christmas tree. Rusty collected Mr. Hugh as he always did, and Skarloey collected the owner. Peter, Sam and Duncan were once again put in charge of delivering the cards, letters and parcels, while Rheneas and Sir Handel carried passengers up and down the line. Sir Handel initially protested about not being able to do something more festive, but was certainly happy to be taking passengers all the same. "'Tis the season of giving, as the others would say," Sir Handel told himself. Freddie, as one might imagine, was the busiest of them all as he continued to collect all the decorations and lights.
"A Christmas to remember, a Christmas to remember,"
he kept chuntering to himself as he worked. As he roared up the hillside towards Rheneas Tunnel, he grew more and more excited for both himself and for Colin. With all this excitement, Freddie began to hurry, and in his haste he wasn't keeping a good lookout. The snow had been heavier than forecast predicted. The section before Crosney Curran Station was worst of all. Just as one pile of snow had been cleared, more slipped down into its place. As Freddie neared the spot where Duncan had derailed many years ago, neither he nor his driver spotted the drift, until it was too late.
Oh, help!
Freddie cried. He plunged deep into the snow while some of the trucks and vans derailed. Freddie tried to move and instantly found that he couldn't. His wheels just spun helplessly. The driver, fireman and guard were shaken, but none were badly hurt. They cautiously surveyed the wreckage. "Oh, this'll certainly need a good looking over," sighed the driver, knowingly. So, while the guard walked off to the station to phone for help, the driver and fireman worked on digging the snow away. As they did so, they also checked on their goods. Peering beneath the tarpaulin of one of the trucks, the driver found some of the wiring from the lights was tangled in knots. Easy enough to untangle," he said, observing that most of the lights weren't badly damaged. "As long as the lights come on, then it shouldn't be too bad." The fireman, meanwhile, peered into one of the vans filled with decorations to find them scattered everywhere. He murmured worriedly, seeing some of the decks faring better than others. Help soon arrived in the form of Duke and the works train. First, they put the trucks and vans back onto the rails, before running back round to help Freddie.
Am I glad to see you, old friend?
Smiled Freddie as he shivered a little. A chain was attached between Freddie and Duke, and when all was ready, Duke began to pull his hardest. It was heavy going at first, as Duke's wheels slipped and spun helplessly on the icy rails. But despite this, in no time at all, Freddie was dragged clear of the snow.
Oh, thank you, old friend,
Freddie simmered happily.
I owe you one. Oh, nonsense. 'Tis the spirit of the season,
replied Duke kindly.
You owe me nothing, unless you'd like me to help with the party preparations,
he suggested.
Then that way you'll get your wish.
Freddie just beamed. Nothing more needed to be said. There was lots to do, but Freddie and Duke worked their hardest. First they cleared the tracks thoroughly, before double-heading their goods train. Some of the ruined decorations were replaced and borrowed from stations on the Fat Controller's railway. Thomas and James, who were both keen to see the surprise party for themselves, delivered them to the wharf. Colin was kept busy too. Then, as night began to fall, he began to be decorated. The Christmas tree had arrived and was put into its tub and decorated also.
What's all this in aid of?
Colin asked, most intrigued. It's for the Christmas party, explained his operator. Freddie asked the Thin Controller if they could have it here, especially for you.
For me?
Colin gasped, astounded.
Well, I don't know what to say.
Just be thankful, said his operator, and enjoy yourself. Colin smiled.
I'll certainly have a few things to say to Freddie when I next see him,
he said, and of course he didn't have long to wait. As night continued to fall, all the guests began arriving at the wharf. Toby brought the Fat Controller, his wife and grandchildren aboard Henrietta, whilst Freddie was chosen to bring the Thin Controller and his family in a coach decorated with lights. The Percival children were delighted by the sight which greeted them.
I'm surprised that you haven't worn yourself out after the day you've had,
the Thin Controller said to Freddie.
'Tis the spirit of the season, sir,
Freddie answered.
I don't mind all the extra work one bit.
The Thin Controller nodded and grinned as he boarded the coach with his family. Then Freddie puffed off into the night, heading back down to the wharf. At the wharf, meanwhile, all was ready. Everyone had found the best spots to get a good view, including many of the Fat Controller's engines.
Hey, this is certainly a Christmas to remember,
said James to anyone who'd listen.
And the first, Christmas by the wharf.
The other engines agreed, and excitement filled the air as Freddie pulled in with his very important passengers. Once the Percival family had surrounded the tree, the thin controller boomed, 1, 2, 3. Then suddenly, like magic, the wharf was flooded with lights. Colin couldn't help but beam with pleasure at the colourful bulbs which lit up in all directions. And then there was the Christmas tree, decorated with its baubles, trinkets, and yet more twinkling lights. Presents were piled high beneath it. Colin had never seen anything like it. The thin controller held up his hand for quiet and made a speech.
Ladies, gentlemen, children, and Indians, I know that this was quite last minute and away from tradition, he said. But now I'd like to give 3 cheers for fearless Freddie and all his friends who have made this occasion possible.
Everyone cheered and the party began.
So this is what a Christmas truly feels like,
Colin said cheerfully.
Thank you, Freddie. You're a very thoughtful friend indeed.
'Tis the spirit of the season,
said Freddie once more.
a time of giving and receiving. You owe me nothing, because you deserve it. Unless, of course, you want to make it up to me next year,
Freddie added with a grin.
Then, as Duke said to me, you'll get your wish.
Colin couldn't help chuckling.
Happy Christmas, Freddie, he said. And Merry Christmas to all your friends too.
Everyone, engines, railway personnel, dock workers and children, all whistled and cheered.
Happy Christmas, Colin,
called Freddie. Everyone celebrated and had marvellous fun until it was time to go home to bed.
You know, it's no fun getting stuck in the snow,
Freddie said to Duke when they got back to the shed.
But it was worth it for Colin.
Duke happily agreed, as he and Freddie settled down to sleep. For both fearless Freddie and Colin the Crane, it had certainly been a Christmas to remember.